Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first night of our 8th annual Equine Industry Symposium, hosted by the University of Guelph Bachelor of Bioresource Management Equine Management students. My name is Katie Kozak, and I will be your MC for the evening. We are looking forward to discussing stable solutions in the equine industry, successful business plans, and what we can do to ensure its sustainability. We have a very exciting night and next few days planned, and we thank you so much for joining us. I would also like to give a very special thanks to our sponsors, Acera Insurance, Equine Guelph, SmartCert, The Rider, Schleza Saddlery, Canadian Horse Journals, and KX Radio, who have helped make this evening possible. Be sure to stick around till the end of the night, as we will be giving away a saddle fitting gift certificate thanks to Schleza Saddlery and a massage course gift certificate thanks to SmartCert. A reminder that the University of Guelph resides on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We recognize this gathering place where we work and learn is home to many past, present, and future First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Please note that videos and microphones for all attendees have been disabled. Throughout the night, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Chat monitors are available to answer general questions, or if it is a question for a presenter, they will be read aloud during the Q&A session. You may also use the raise hand function during the Q&A, and you will be invited to unmute your microphone to ask your question live. Please note that rude or offensive comments will not be tolerated. This is the 8th annual Equine Industry Symposium. The Equine Industry Symposium was started in 2016 and aims to grow knowledge about horses and develop important relationships within the equine industry. Discussing industry issues without primary reference to any discipline is something in which all members of the industry must engage. The Equine Industry Symposium is hosted by Bachelor of Bioresource Management Equine Management students. The BBRM program at the University of Guelph is one of its kind in Canada. It provides students with the opportunity to gain skills and experience from accomplished faculty experts, as well as hands-on experience. The equine management major includes courses such as equine event management. Students in this course have organized and are hosting the Equine Industry Symposium. Tonight, our main focus will be on bridging the labor gap. We are joined by wonderful speakers and panelists who will be talking about what this means to them, what challenges they face, and how they set their business up for longevity. Our first speaker of the night will be Dr. Kendra Coulter, who will discuss the current state of the industry and its challenges. Following this, we will have a panel discussion led by Akaash Maharaj, featuring 5 equine education students and graduates, all with vast knowledge and experience in the industry. We will then open the floor to a Q&A session where those listening will be encouraged to ask questions to our guests. We will begin the symposium with Dr. Kendra Coulter. Dr. Coulter is a leading expert on animals and work, animal protection organizations, and policy and gender equity. She is an award-winning author of dozens of scholarly articles, book chapters, and public reports. She is a fellow of the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics and Public Policy involving animals, such as investigations and prevention work. We are so grateful she is here and excited to hear from her. Dr. Coulter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katie. Hello to everyone. It's nice to know that you're out there, though I can't see you, especially on such a cold and wet day like this. Of course, the worst kind of weather for horses and horse people alike, but it's a pleasure to be here to speak to you about some of the labor challenges and the labor gap in horse stables. So this is the requisite proof that I was on the back of a horse before I could walk. So that's Champy, the Appy there in rural Alberta. To this day, I'm a little afraid of how muddy they are. I'll be finding that out later. Horses for me are a professional area of focus as well as a personal passion. And it's very important for us to bridge the two in terms of these animals who give so much to our communities and our lives that we give back in return. So I've been studying animals and work and anything that involves the connections between the two for nearly a decade now. And often it culminates in books like this. So I do consider the broad range of animals, but horses are always central and are always a key piece of that. So it's included animals work and the promise of interspecies solidarity, a co-edited collection on animal labor, and most recently, Defending Animals, Finding Hope on the Front Lines of Animal Protection. And so these insights that I'm sharing today have resulted not only in books of this kind, but academic research, accessible research. I think it's really crucial that we'll be having these conversations between people in universities and people on the front lines so that we can be best exchanging knowledge and doing best for each other and for the animals themselves. I want to start by recognizing that we're talking about horses, horse people, and what I call the equine industries. So I'm a little bit different than the folks at Guelph in that I don't refer to a singular equine industry because I recognize the broad cross-section of things that are being done and that there are some pretty significant differences in the way that horses are being conceptualized and used across these different industries. Of course, what unites them all are the horses themselves. As horse people ourselves, we are very diverse in terms of how we're positioned, in terms of our economic capital, in terms of our power over our workplaces, in terms of whether this is a job or a leisure activity. So I do want to recognize that the identifying patterns that cut across a lot of different stables, but I think it's crucial to simultaneously not paint everything and everyone with the same brush, but rather to recognize these differences that can be quite significant and sometimes warrant additional discussion. I think it's absolutely crucial to also start by recognizing that horses are sentient beings, not engines. And of course, that means they have the capacity to think and feel, pain and discomfort on the one hand, but also joy on the other, and that recognizing both of those ends and a lot of the spaces in between is really crucial. So they're not simply engines, they're not inanimate objects or vehicles. But to play with that metaphor a little bit, we can recognize that our uses of them create and fuel jobs and economic activity. So the horses themselves are the foundation. They always need to be kept central, but our uses of them are what create and fuel jobs and economic activity. Therefore, it's important to be looking at those jobs and that economic activity, seeing what some of the challenges are and perhaps what some of the possibilities could be. I've drawn this constellation, what I'm calling this equine constellation, as another way of visualizing that idea, which is that the horses are at the center. Without them, nothing happens. But then as you extend out from them, there are a lot of different sectors and subsectors. So I'm not even talking about different types of activities here or different sporting engagements. I'm talking about workplaces and economic organizations. So if we extend out, we see the sort of first tier are the stables themselves, and then direct engagements with horses. So it's feed and supplies, care services, including veterinary, massage, farriers, etc. Events, and then extending out from there, we see that this cluster of activity itself fuels and is fueled by an additional set of economic spheres. So whether it's growing crops or manufacturing equine-specific products, then selling those equine-specific products. There's a lot of activity and a lot of different kinds of jobs for people with different skills and different educational levels that extend out from that heart and that center, the horses themselves. So my focus today is going to be on the horse stables in particular. So regardless of what subsector or type of equine activity we're talking about, there are going to be horses living somewhere. And this primary care, this very essential frontline care of looking after them and working with them on a day-to-day basis takes place in horse stables. And so that will be the focus of my remarks and my analysis. So the labor landscape is an interesting one, of course. I think that most people in the audience have a pretty good sense of what it looks like, which is that we have quite a few people, women in particular, a really high proportion of women, a really high proportion of white women working on the front lines with horses on a day-to-day basis in stables, whether they're in grooms or stable staff type roles, perhaps stable managers, certainly as coaches and stable owner operators. And there are some patterns that emerge when you take a look at those stables and the workplace dimensions of them, which I'll highlight. I'm asked to speak about the labor gap, but I would suggest there are in fact two ways of thinking about the labor gap. The first would be a gap between employer need and the workforce. By extension, when we're talking about employers, we're also talking about the clients. If we're in a boarding context, the employer needs workers, but clients and boarders also need to know that there are people, reliable people doing the work that's keeping their horse happy and healthy on a day-to-day basis. So there can be a gap between what's needed from employers to deliver high quality boarding care and the workforce. I'm not going to say the workforce availability. I'm not going to say the workforce skills. I'm not going to get to that level of detail. I'm simply going to say there can be a gap between the existing workforce and the employer need. The second gap would be between worker expectations and the realities of working in horse stables, or the outcomes, the actual experiences and results of working in horse stables. So people who think that they may want to or are beginning to work in stables, there can be a gap between what they are expecting, not even necessarily what they're wanting, what they're expecting, and what those realities and outcomes will be on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to try to address both of these and certainly want to recognize them. So a few years ago, frustrated with the shortage of data about what was actually happening in horse stables, I undertook a large survey, a large study. Over 1,000 people participated, and it was open to those stable owner operators, those currently working in stables. And this was a really valuable group, those who had previously worked in stables but were no longer doing so. So it really helped lay a foundation. I think everyone at Guelph in the program and people who've been following these industry symposiums over the years know that one of our challenges is a shortage of data. So this is not unique to Canada. I can confirm, having studied equine cultures and workplaces around the world, this is an international challenge, but it is a frustrating one wherever it appears, including here. So this was an important opportunity to hear from people directly who work in the stables. Few things have changed in the world since 2018. You know, we had a little pandemic there that's exacerbated a lot of the challenges and made things that much worse or that much more challenging. But I think a number of the key findings are still relevant. We've also had a significant change in terms of the organization that does cruelty investigations, where at this time it was the OSPCA, a charity, a nonprofit responsible. We now have a dedicated public team. So there have been some things that have changed since this survey was completed. But I think some of the key patterns are there, and it's always available freely at equinework.ca. That will take you to the study if you want to delve into it. And before we can really start understanding what's going on over the next few days, we want to define what some of the problems or some of the challenges are. And this report helps, but I will also elaborate. I think there are two linked sides of the same coin, or maybe one side of the coin with two really linked challenges, which on the one hand, on the employer side in particular, is the challenge of recruiting effective workers and retaining them. This is a secret, and this isn't a newsflash for no one who's been around horse stables. Again, not unique to Canada, but certainly a problem here in Ontario. Probably the central challenge in the workplace is recruiting and then retaining. Those are often linked, though they can be approached slightly differently. And part of that, and why I don't separate it out, is that the question of job satisfaction for workers is inextricably connected to that. We cannot separate those two. They are a key part of the challenge, a key pairing that go together. So how do we've acknowledged that that's a challenge, and probably the central challenge. What do we attribute as the cause or causes? And I would wager that there are a few different causes, and we want to be accurate and precise about what those are if we want to try to move towards solutions. So at its core, I think the question of skills and how they're both defined and valued is absolutely crucial. I, in general, am not a proponent of terms like unskilled labor, for example. I think that virtually every single job requires skill of some kind. So I tend to avoid that particular term. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it recognizes the truth of what's going on. Now, there are people perhaps outside the equine industries, maybe even some people within them, who would see frontline stable labor, so things like stable staff or grooms, as being unskilled. So I would categorically disagree with that. There are a range of physical skills needed to be able to do very difficult work in all kinds of weather at all hours of the day, often 365 days of the year. So there are very specific physical skills. There's strength required, but not only strength. There's an immense amount of sensitivity and intricate skills that are necessary. So I think that that's the first place to start. Secondarily, the amount of intellectual work that's actually involved in caring for horses is high. So we are expecting and asking people to have a fairly broad understanding of horses as a species. So the things that cut across horses of all kinds. So certain indicators, how they communicate deliberately, how they communicate unintentionally, what they're betraying about what they're feeling. All sorts of things, like if I said, my back hurts, I'm ovulating, I'm grumpy today because I had an argument with Joe over there, I don't like you. Those are all things that horses could say to us on a day-to-day basis, and often are saying to us on a day-to-day basis, just not in English or French or German or verbal languages that we understand. So we are asking stable staff to be able to understand what horses are communicating and simultaneously to communicate back to them. So there's actually a shared language created between horses and humans who work together on a day-to-day basis. And so attentive, attuned, stable staff are going to be cognizant of the broad patterns and those intricate individual specifics. So for example, the same behavior under gray horse over there, Cloud is doing something, and that's fairly normal for Cloud. But if Jesse over here does it, the bay, that's very unusual for him. So that's revealing something. He's saying something to us because I know Jesse and I know his personality, and he's not normally like this, or he doesn't normally act that way. So we are asking people who work with horses to have a fairly high level of skill. Yet at the same time, there's this broader pattern of seeing stable work as unskilled, that it's minimum wage or below the minimum wage, unfortunately, in some cases. So part of this is discussing and determining how we can identify and recognize the skills that are needed. If someone's simply cleaning stalls, that still takes particular kinds of skills, and you can be gleaning valuable information about horses based on what you find in their stalls, undoubtedly, in terms of their physical or mental health. But anyone who's going to be doing interactive work with horses, that is a set of intricate skills, and I think it's crucial for the industries to recognize that as part of this conversation, that we're not simply talking about anyone who can do this work. You do need to have particular abilities, particular skills, and specific attributes. Here I'm going to bring in a little bit of management theory, but I'm going to do it in a way that I hope isn't too bookish, but actually really relevant to what's going on in stables. And I really hope that this will help diagnose, especially some stable owner operators who are out there, and diagnose what's going on. So in the broader world of understanding organizations, whether it's an office building or a hospital or a small business, we do a lot of studying of what motivates people. And part of that conversation is, of course, the rewards. So what's motivating them? What do they want to obtain in return? So we can recognize that there are what we call extrinsic, or more easily just external rewards. And in particular, that's monetary. So that's something they're seeking as a reward, and undoubtedly crucial because everyone needs to pay bills. So there are perfectly understandable extrinsic motivations that are driving people, including those who are seeking work in horse stables. Equally as important is understanding intrinsic motivations, internal motivations. So these are interesting and are really going to vary depending a lot on the sector, but horse-specific intrinsic rewards could include things like respect. That transcends workplaces of all kinds. People want to feel respected. It may include things like status, that if you're working with a particularly impressive trainer, fancy barn, that you're getting some associative status from working there and being associated with this really successful team, this really successful rider. That can be an intrinsic motivator for you, as you want to be part of that pursuit of excellence. A lot of people work with horses because it makes them happy to be around horses, and sometimes they'd rather be around horses than humans, which, I can get that. I understand that. And then there's questions of love, that the love for the horses, and it could extend into a moral or ethical sense of duty, which is that I am the front line. I am caring for these horses on a day-to-day basis. I am motivated. If sometimes people articulate it as, if I don't do this, no one else will, or I'm trying to amplify their voices. I'm trying to hear what they're saying and communicate that to a broader audience that may or may not listen to me. Both of these extrinsic and intrinsic factors are going to be at play. And there's no formula. There's no magic calculation I can give you to determine what proportion is affecting which people. Instead, I'm hoping that you can be attuned to this, that in equine workplaces, people are going to need to be motivated by extrinsic factors like the pay, like availability of days off, those sort of tangible material things of life. And it's perfectly reasonable for people to want a decent paycheck, to want a living wage. Things are rather expensive and getting more and more expensive. And so it's not an unreasonable demand, and that's going to be part of it. What's really interesting when you speak to stable workers and hear from them is that there is often an expectation that the pay will not be high. So they're not assuming they're going to be making $30 an hour. Those who want to have a higher pay standard tend to shift a little bit. They might pursue massage therapy, or they might pivot within the industry to a slightly higher paying position. Folks who are drawn to frontline stable work for the short term, medium, or longer term generally don't expect high pay, but they do hope for fair pay. And at this point, higher pay is going to increase the likelihood of recruitment and retention, given the state of the broader labor market overall. So that is something that can be used overall. But I really don't want to downplay the importance of the intrinsic factors. The degree to which people feeling respected and valued by the employer unequivocally, by clients whenever possible, ideally always, that can be a significant motivator. I often heard, I knew I was going to make a lot of money here, but it's the rudeness I can't handle. And so the degree to which kindness, respect, seeing people's values, seeing the skills that they're bringing, understanding, they're noticing specific things about particular horses. They caught something quickly because they were paying attention. Seeing the value in that sort of skill that people are bringing to the table and bringing to the aisle can be really significant in terms of motivating them and rewarding them. Don't underestimate the power of treating people with respect, with kind words, with seeing and being attuned to what they're offering and the effort that they're making. And I think that can play a really significant role, especially with retention. So on the challenge of worker expectations and outcomes, let's just be honest and frank. There are both adjustable and non-adjustable dimensions for employers, right? You cannot necessarily pay $50 an hour, and that is just an objective fact. So that's a non-adjustable dimension. But what could you adjust? What could you adjust in terms of trying to make your particular organization, your workplace, more appealing based on this knowledge that workers, of course, want to have those extrinsic factors met, that they need the pay, but simultaneously the importance of respect. What could you be adjusting in terms of your day-to-day operations, but perhaps also in terms of how you're recruiting and what you're establishing at the outset? A recurring challenge in businesses of all kinds is that there are not clear expectations communicated by employers. And that can lead to a lot of breakdown. It can lead to a lot of tensions and challenges. So there's no one size fits all, but each employer can take this knowledge and sort of put it in their toolkit and understand that communicating clearly about expectations is going to be helpful, and then providing constant reinforcing feedback of even small things can be very meaningful in the challenging workplace like horse stables. How can the adjustable dimensions be adjusted to better respect and better value people? What could you change in your particular workplace? Thinking outside the box, learning from a peer in another part of the sector, or just saying, there's something in my stable here. Yes, I could offer more of this. Yes, I could offer more of this in kind. I could offer this complimentary service. Those sorts of gestures and acts can be quite meaningful. And treating this for what it is, which is a kind of skilled labor. In office places and white collar workplaces, there are onboarding procedures, there are training procedures, there are very clear steps taken at the outset, especially in the early stages, to clarify and establish those expectations as a two-way street. Both what are the employees expecting and what are you expecting from them? Taking that seriously, rather than just doing sort of an on-the-fly interview, while you're sweeping the aisle, but rather taking it seriously, demonstrating that this is a profession and that you have particular professional expectations and are seeking people who are reliable, who take their work seriously, who are detail-oriented. I think establishing that this is an important workplace and a really important one because horses' lives are at stake, horses' happiness and well-being is at stake. Professionalizing what you can, especially in terms of the communication, that can be particularly important. It shouldn't be downplayed. It shouldn't be assumed. So I do want to say the struggle is real. I see it as a horse caretaker. I see it as a researcher. I see it as someone who's done research in other parts of the world. This is a challenge. It's a challenge for our industries, for people who want to have meaningful and ethical organizations for horses and horse people, where everyone is treated with respect, where everyone is contributing and benefiting simultaneously. the costs are increasing. The external costs, things you cannot change, natural gas, hay, these things are really significant. And so I do just want to express that. I think we want to talk about this challenge. Most stable owner operators think this has long been a challenge. This is not new, and that is correct. That said, it's perhaps becoming more of a challenge at this point, and this is why it's particularly crucial to be having events like this where we can be exploring options. And the success that we have as people who care about the equine industries directly affect horses' physical, psychological, and social well-being. This is not simply about inanimate objects, or if we slack, or if someone doesn't come in, or if someone leaves early, or if someone doesn't complete their tasks, it doesn't particularly matter to anything except maybe the bottom line. In this instance, not only can there be financial costs, there can be physical, psychological, and social impacts on horses. If people don't show up, if people don't finish their tasks, if people leave early. That's why it's so important that we try to get it right, or at least try to do better than we are. And what's so key as we're exploring possibilities and options is that the horses and their well-being is not sacrificed as a cost-saving measure. I would be horrified if people were cutting back on horse feed, if we're cutting back on their stall, the cleanliness of their stalls, etc., as a cost-saving measure. We do need to keep them front of mind and their welfare front of mind, and that their well-being is a non-negotiable cost, that not only should their basics be met, but that we should be aiming higher in terms of their welfare and well-being, and not seeing those as cost-cutting options. Instead, I think this is an opportunity to take a look, as I've outlined, at what can be adjusted in creative ways, in terms of establishing clear expectations, in terms of finding where rewards can be augmented, and maybe it's not always monetary. Treating people with respect, clearly establishing expectations. How can those sorts of strategies help save money and deliver better quality care? That's where I think we need to be developing options and investing our efforts, so that the horses never have to sacrifice. So we've talked about some difficult, challenging stuff. This are my two again, and I feel like you will delight in the fact that I discovered they have not doppelgangers but donkelgangers. I mean, it's so absolutely adorable, and certainly a reminder that it's for equines and equids like this that we do this work, and why it's so important. My sincere thanks to you. Some great thanks to the students who have done this organizing work, to Dr. Murkies and everyone at the University of Guelph for facilitating these conversations and plans of actions. Look forward to a happy, healthy future for horse people and horses alike. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Coulter. It is wonderful to hear all of the work you've done to help animals in our industry. Your insight and understanding of the connection between animals and people is truly inspiring, and we are grateful you were able to share it with us. We'd once again like to thank our sponsors, Acera Insurance, Equine Guelph, SmartCert, The Rider, Schleza Saddlery, Canadian Horse Journals, and KX Radio for helping to make this evening possible. Next up is Akaash Maharaj leading the panel discussion on what attracted them to the equine industry and challenges they have faced. Akaash is twice decorated in Canada's national honors for his work on peace in the Middle East and for services to integrity in national sport. He was commissioned a Kentucky Colonel, the state's highest honor, for his contribution to global affairs. Akaash has a passion for bringing Canada and other states into compliance with their commitments under global treaties of biodiversity and climate change. He was the triple gold medalist at the International Championship of Equestrian Skill at Arms, and he also led the overall Canadian equestrian team and federation as CEO to the most successful Olympics and Paralympics of all time. Akaash will also introduce the fellow panelists, Victoria Willen, Julia Howe, Lisa Vicaire, Alana Burden, and Taylor LaRoche. Akaash, take it away.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you to everyone who has organized today's Equine Industry Symposium. I think we're all conscious of the fact that an enormous amount of work goes into making this possible, and we are grateful to the students and to the faculty members of the University of Guelph for doing so. I'm delighted to moderate tonight's panel discussion on bridging the labour gap in the equine sector. And our panelists are a stellar group of people, alumni from Guelph's BBRM, Bachelor Bioresource Management Programme, Ridgetown and Equine Guelph. And they are all now working or running businesses in the horse sector. They are going to tell us about their journeys as people who pursued equine studies, built careers as equine professionals, and are now sometimes seeking employees and co-workers in equine industries. Our 5 panelists are Victoria Willen, who studied at Guelph and earned a diploma in equine care and management. She started giving riding lessons with her personal horses and then went on to build her own business, Victory Horsemanship Stable, an equestrian centre in Essex, Ontario. We're also joined by Julia Howe, who graduated from Guelph's first ever BBRM cohort. She has a career in equine insurance with BFL Canada, and she also runs Willow Ridge Equestrian Centre in Port Colborne, Ontario. Lisa Vicaire completed equine Guelph online courses, and she runs equine therapy and equine assisted learning at her facility Algonquin Acres in Notre-Dame-du-Nord, Quebec, where she employs graduates of Guelph's other programs. Alana Burden is a graduate of the BBRM program as well. Over the past 3 years, she has run the Valkyrie Equestrian Centre in Guelph, and she employs 3 full-time and many part-time staff. Finally, Taylor LaRoche is another graduate of the BBRM program. She works as an equine nutritionist with Purina and Brooks Feeds, and she runs an equestrian centre that she founded and grew, the Écurie des Noyers Stables in Somerstown, Ontario. So we'll begin with Victoria. Hello, Victoria.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. Thank you for joining us. So in addition to your diploma at Guelph, you've had a very practical journey, providing lessons yourself, and then on the basis of that, building an equestrian centre. Did your diploma help you? Did your education help you along that journey? Was it an important part of equipping you with the skills that you found that you needed later on in life?
It definitely did. I definitely had a very practical approach to horses in the beginning. Growing up on a boarding stable, I wasn't as involved with the business side of things. So that was my main focus going into the diploma, was to kind of mix the two together and help get a very successful business rather than one that's more on the hobby side of things.
And so that was your experience as someone who was building a career. Now that you're running your center, as an employer, do you look for people with similar qualifications as yours, or do you favor people with practical experiences? In other words, if you were looking for an ideal employee, what kind of qualities would you look for?
I definitely enjoy teaching people and giving them the opportunity, whether they've come from an equine background or not. I like being able to teach them and have them kind of grow as an employee at my place. As an ideal employee, they would have a little bit of horse experience, enough to be comfortable and kind of have a background in just, the, like kind of Dr. Kendra was saying, with being able to read the horse and understand that a little tell can mean something really big, and being able to also be willing to increase their education, whether that's with going to some online courses or pursuing an actual program and leaving for a little bit. Either one, I think, is very valuable.
So your education was important, but you didn't stop learning when you left university.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. So Lisa, you're working in equine therapy and assisted learning, and that's a sector that has grown tremendously over recent years. It's attracted a great deal of attention. One of the questions I'm curious about is, as someone who has built a career in this area, how do you sift good centers from bad, or people who know what they're talking about, especially in an area that, on the one hand, touches people very deeply and make a huge difference in their lives, but on the other hand, does not have a lot of regulation or formal universally recognized qualifications? For something specialized like yours, how do you determine who would be a good employee and who might not?
I think in my field, it is very important to look at people if they have taken any type of courses in this section of the industry, for example, equine assisted learning courses involving hippotherapy, different skills like that. But for me, I think finding an employees that fit well in my area of business, I really need them to be able to adapt easily, because we do have to change what we're doing very often. So the horse factor and having knowledge and experience with the horses is very important for my stable management team. But for my team that are out there working with the students, I really focus more on adaptability, how they can work with younger students, older students, people with disabilities, etc. A lot of patience, but I am definitely looking at people who are willing to learn, willing to get different certifications from different centers. But I was really glad to be able to hire University of Guelph graduates because I knew that they had the same background of education as I did. So I knew I could rely on them when it came to taking care of my horses and keeping them safe. So it was really nice to have people coming in to work together that had that background of knowledge and that were good with the children I have to work with. That was really important factors for me.
So personal qualities of personality and character are paramount for you. Would it be fair to say that the technical skills that people need can be learned, but you think that the important things are the kind of character and approach that they bring to the job?
Yes, for my part of the industry, I really feel that brings that can make a difference in whether a child has a really good session with their equine therapy or a not so great session. I think what we bring to the table to each session as the facilitators is really important. And part of that is having a really good energy and just being able to adapt to whatever situation we have to face.
So for someone who might not have had a formal education in the equine sector and who's starting at the beginning of his or her career and would like to demonstrate those skills, are there things that you look for? Are there qualities that people can show or demonstrate to give evidence that they possess the kinds of personal qualities that you think are important in the sector?
I definitely like to see, I just like to watch how people engage with students. I think it's really important to take note of all the ways that people engage because there's many ways to adapt to do that. I definitely just like to test people's creativity skills, give people examples of different situations that we can run into. But yeah, so for those qualities, I think that patience and stuff is very characteristic, but it's easy to also develop the skills to work with different students. And if people are willing to learn, that's a huge factor for me. So if I am talking to a prospective future employee, I like to see the determination of learning new things and being able to admit when you are not understanding part of what is being put in front of you. I think communication is one of the biggest factors in my field. So I like to see someone who can communicate their understanding and their misunderstanding of different things. So basically communication, adaptability, and creativity is very huge factors for me. And then I just encourage expanding, especially if you have to expand in your equine knowledge. I recently met someone who was studying to be an equine assisted therapist, but they are still new to the horse world. So they're starting at different stages. And I think anyone can adapt their learning to where they're at, but they have to be willing to learn. I think that is what makes the difference in having successful employees starting in a new industry that they haven't worked in previously, because anyone can succeed as long as they're willing to learn the new information and admit when they don't know something.
Julia, you've had experience with a large corporation, BFL, and a local equestrian centre, the one that the Willow Ridge Equestrian Centre, which you run yourself. Are there based on that experience, is there a difference in what makes a good employee or a good prospective employee? Are there things that you wish that people, whether they're aspiring to work for a large corporation or a smaller equine centre, that you think you wish you had known at the start of your career and you wish that they would know as you are considering hiring either employees or co-workers?
So I think that a big part of why big employers, and even if I were to hire staff here at my boarding facility, look for people with educational experiences, often it shows commitment to showing up every day, to really going after your dreams and putting in the hard work to get where you want to be. I know when I work for BFL, what we look for employees is someone that has some type of background degree. It doesn't have to be specifically in an equine degree, but that's certainly how I got my foot in the door at BFL myself, was because of the background experience I had. But realistically, having that education shows that you're committed to showing up every day, doing the best that you can, furthering yourself to become the best that you can be to succeed in a career in the future. So, I mean, if I were to hire someone here, I would definitely be looking for someone that has some type of either educational background or work background, showing years of commitment somewhere instead of being kind of flaky and not really having any experience. I think that makes a big difference to a potential employer for sure.
Your emphasis on people being willing and able to turn up makes me think that you've run into people who were not willing to do either.
I mean, I think anyone running a barn knows that, good, reliable help is definitely a tough thing to find. And that's why right now we have a small enough facility that I can kind of do it all myself before and after work and on lunch breaks and stuff out in the barn. But I definitely know that for employers, having that background, whether it's a college or university degree, especially in a field that you're interested in, it definitely just shows that you're committed to actually showing up and making sure that you're on time and that you're really committed to doing that every single day. And it's something you're taking seriously.
And with your work in BFL, that is both work that has a horse dimension because you're working in equine insurance, but also a hard business dimension. So based on that experience, which are the harder skills for people to learn, or where do you think people need to focus? In other words, would you counsel someone to get an equine education and learn the business skills on the job? Or would you counsel someone to get a business education and learn the horse skills on the job?
Ooh, that's a good question. So for BFL, I know we look for people that have equine experience simply because, there are a lot of different insurance professionals out there. I would say it's easier to teach the business portion and have that equine background and knowledge, either I'd say with the barn work or a BFL job, having that equine foundation and having learned even like the essential horse care skills, that really comes into play even with an equine insurance job, because when people are calling in with potential claims or situations, it really makes a big difference when your understanding of what your customers and clients are going through and can relate to the equine specific things that they're referring to. I think that anyone can be taught the business side of things. That's a very broad skill in our society, but having the actual equine knowledge and the horse care knowledge is something that's really extra valuable and puts people over the top.
It's interesting. So from your perspective, horse sense is a more valuable skill than business sense.
This business sense is a widespread skill, and having that specific equine knowledge is tougher to find for sure.
Thank you. And Alana, you are managing staff, both full-time staff and part-time staff. Management skills are one of those things everyone needs in life, but often are not taught, at least early on in life. As someone who's managed staff, what are the kinds of qualities that you look for that make someone a good employee to manage? And what kinds of skills do you think that they should demonstrate to a potential employer to make people believe this person will be a joy to manage rather than a trial to manage?
I think that just coming from a background where I worked at a few different restaurants and stuff like that too, I definitely appreciate people that are willing to learn and basically have the ability to kind of take direction and just take initiative in certain situations. I appreciate people that are, because it's hard, because especially in the horse industry, everybody has their own way of doing things, and there's multiple right ways of doing things and there's definite wrong ways, but it's just knowing that you can branch out into different directions and definitely take people that are just willing to continually learn. I find are the best people to have around.
From the other side of the ledger, in terms of learning management skills so that you can run a facility and you can manage a team, especially given that not everyone will be easy to manage, are those skills that you learned entirely on the job through trial and error? Are they skills that you picked up through your education? How did you acquire those skills?
I would say on the job and through education as well. In this program, doing stuff like the symposium, it definitely helped you branch out and to be able to be comfortable speaking with people. But then after school, going out into the industry, working in different barns and just kind of interacting with different trainers, interacting with different barn owners and managers. And basically, I interact with people constantly. My phone is still going currently right now. There's so many different people constantly messaging me, asking me questions and stuff like that. So just being, I'd say, available too. and just having that openness to just kind of always being willing to chat with people.
Thank you. So in Kendra's presentation, she talked about some of the ways in which the equine labor marketplace can fail. In other words, when there are people who have skills but can't find a place to invest those skills, or their employer is looking for people with skills who are unable to find them. I'll go back to Victoria. How did you bridge that gap yourself, Victoria? When you were at the start of your career, how did you look for people who wanted those skills? And now that you are running Victory Horsemanship Stables, how do you find people who have the skills that you need?
Looking for people was not as hard. There's definitely a very small knit group of horse people in the Windsor-Essex area. So it's pretty easy to get yourself kind of going. And then on top of going to Ridgetown, we started in Clinton first in my program. So you get to branch out into that kind of horse community, and then you come down to Ridgetown. So to kind of get everything to connect is a little bit harder with them being far apart. But looking for those people, it becomes a little bit easier, because if they're looking at moving, I kind of made some connections where if they were thinking about it, then I know who I could reach out to. Since then, most of my employees, most of them are part-time, and a lot of them are either new horse owners who started boarding with me. Some of them were clients, so they were students in my lesson program, and then they bought their own horse. And just in them kind of wanting to learn more, and being able to actually manage their own horses and get to know their own horses, they more or less approached me sometimes, and asked to be put on as an employee to see if they could learn a little bit more about their own horses, but also continue their education with me in the more of the management portion of everyday things.
Thank you. And Lisa, I'll go back to asking you about the question of standards and ethics. I mean, we all know that standards and ethics are important in every profession. They're especially important in the horse sector, because the horse can't defend his own interest and relies upon the goodwill and the ethics of the people in his life to do so. But I think that there's an added dimension for therapy and assisted learning, because often that means dealing with vulnerable people in addition to vulnerable horses. Do you think that as we look at the sector as a whole, it would be a good idea for there to be more regulation of equine activities with vulnerable people? Or do you think that would have the effect of introducing unnecessary bureaucracy and red tape and stifling innovation? I mean, for yourself as someone who is in the sector, do you think it needs more oversight, or do you think it needs more freedom of action?
I definitely think more oversight would not be harmful to our industry. There are a lot of people practicing just not in the safest ways. And there's a lot of different certifications that certify in very different ways. And I would just like to see maybe a bit more of a common grounds on how equine assisted learning and equine therapies should go, what equipment should be used, helmet standards, because there is situations where there's not enough staff on hand, or not proper helmets, or not proper fitting helmets. And I think that's the type of thing that needs a lot of regulation, and just kind of getting everybody who's in this industry more on a same page. How with riding lessons, it's kind of basic information that every student should have a well-fitting helmet. Well, that should go the same for equine assisted learning and equine therapy, but it's not, because there is no higher person kind of giving anyone the directions they should follow. And for me, one of the most important things in my barn is safety always. So I just find it hard when I see other people practicing in less safe ways. But I encourage learning always. And I think it's really easy to educate people on the safety, but there's just so many different programs that are certifying to do this job that we're not necessarily all on the same page. So I think it would be beneficial in a way to get us all kind of agreeing on certain things, or, getting more people aware of the ways our clients can get their services covered, stuff like that. Just more of a of a group oriented, kind of like how Equestrian Canada works for coaches. But for us, I think that would be super beneficial.
So if there were a system to provide something closer to a universally recognized standard of performance, it might help the sector, you think, because it would mean that insurance companies, people who pay for care, might be more willing to invest in the sector, might be more willing to cover those activities in addition to an increase in standards of performance in the sector itself. I'm going to come back to your experience with BFL. I'm going to guess that many people who think about a career in the horse world don't immediately think of insurance, but instead think about, but it is an example of the fact that if you have an interest in horses, there are options beyond the obvious ones, like running a stable or being a rider or being a coach or an instructor. Are there ways that, are there other kinds of horse-related careers that you would counsel people early on in their lives to consider? Or are there ways they can find out about options beyond the more obvious options in the horse sector?
Yeah, I think being a part of the degree programs and the certificates that are offered through Guelph are a really great opportunity to learn about what type of careers are out there. I know that I often am interested in joining these types of panels or lecturing in classes as a guest, because I wish that there had been more people like me when I was going through the program that had kind of successful careers as a result. I know a lot of people got frustrated right away. They couldn't find that ideal equine job, and a lot of people were not looking to run their own stables or have their own facility or coach or do barn work for a living. So I think it's great to know that, like I took the degree program thinking I really liked business, I really liked horses, was hoping to find a career involved in the two, whether that was going to be working for a feed company or helping to manage a tack store or something like that, was kind of more along the lines of what I was hopeful for, as opposed to doing the physical barn work. I ended up getting the career with BFL through another colleague and classmate that I'd had in that BFL program. So it's honestly just a really great thing to know that there are, even desk type jobs that are still equine related that you can have as a result of these types of programs, and then kind of combine your love of horses and the equine industry with having that career and being able to build on it and do other types of insurance as well too. It just kind of got my foot in the door to an industry that I never really thought was something I'd want to do. And now, even managing my own farm and having boarders, I have such a thorough understanding of the liability associated with it and what type of coverage you need. And when people are calling in and saying, well, I have a mini horse and, he's like a big dog. And I'm like, I have a farm, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I can firsthand say that I have horses in my backyard and, have the all round knowledge that these people are looking for and that a lot of insurance companies wouldn't have. So it's a really great thing to have that background and be able to combine it with a career.
I hope BFL gives you an insurance on your facility.
Yeah, I am writing it myself, actually. So yes.
Cute. And Alana, one of the things that you said you look for in employees are people who are willing to learn and to take direction. I think it's fair to say that there aren't a lot of weak personalities in the horse world. And for most of us, often dealing with the horses is less of a trial than dealing with our fellow horse people. So in that context, are there things that you think a sector that is made up of people who tend to have strong personalities can do so that they're not just good horse people, but also good employees and good team members? Are there activities that they should undertake or experiences that you would like them to have so that they can not just command their horses, but be willing to take instruction from their peers?
So when looking for people with experience, I have a few that are, I'd say, career horse women. They've kind of been in the industry their entire lives as well. I definitely have had few people come through and like part-time workers that haven't been able to fit into our kind of the way that we run our facility. I like to give everybody an equal chance, though. I don't think that people are completely unteachable and try to see the good in everybody, but it is very tricky to try to find people that mesh well with your team and the way that you like to lead things and do things throughout the barn. I always say the horses are the easy part, it's the people. But just I find animal people in general are just generally strong personalities. They're such passionate people. They have such, like, they care for their horses so much. They want those expectations with everything in their life, right? But right now I have such a good crew. I'm so happy to have found them. It definitely helps working with the staff. I've been at barns before where the barn owner, I wouldn't see them for 2 weeks. They'd maybe pop out in the evening time to like deal with clients and stuff, and then I wouldn't see the owners and they wouldn't come down. I'm up the stalls with the people that work with me every day. I do turn in and turn out with them. So it just kind of being really hands-on and working with your people. I think that really shows to be like a good leader, and it definitely helps them just like kind of, I don't know, fit in with the group that you have.
Thank you. No, I think I think it's fair to say that people join the horse sector because they love horses, not because they love horse people. For everyone who in the audience, if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to type them into the chat function, and we will go around and give everyone a chance to ask those questions.
Thank you so much, Cash, and thank you, Victoria and Julia, Lisa, Alana, and unfortunately Taylor couldn't join us, but that's okay. It was a very insightful discussion, and it's nice to hear all the different sides of the industry, how you all handle challenges, and how you strive to make the best of your business. Our journeys into the equine industry have all been different, but it proves true that our passion is really what drives us. So we'll now open the floor to our Q&A session. If there's anything you'd like to ask, like Cash said, about topics mentioned or more direct questions to a specific guest, now is your chance. Please feel free to raise your hand using the Zoom tool, and you will be called on to turn on your mic, or type a question into the chat and we will read it for you. So we'll now move into any questions.
We do have one question in the chat that I will read out, and it's for Kendra. The question asked, thanks for your presentation. After listening to your work, it still doesn't seem like the equine industries can provide a living wage to most of its employees. Did your research address the demographics that the majority of equine employees are women, and most frequently young women, and women as a demographic are underpaid in all industries? What steps could industry leaders take to make the industry a more viable career path, specifically from a financial and living wage lens? Kendra, it's a big question.
Very good point. So really interestingly, of the people who responded to the survey, I haven't got it entirely memorized, but I did a quick look. The median age was actually in 30s. So I think there are some perceptions that the sort of frontline stable workforce is really skewed young. That may or may not necessarily be true. That there are a number of people, and especially those who stick around, are seeing this as a viable career in a slightly broader age group. However, the gender dynamic, you're absolutely correct. It's an industry that's large majority women, and I mean, we could do a really big analysis about how did the wages get so low. I think there's a few things going on, but part of the reality is that running horse stables is expensive. There's that saying, how do you become a millionaire with horses? Well, you start off as a billionaire. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. That said, there are also examples of successful businesses, and so I think it's great to hear from these impressive women about how they're balancing that. Now, in terms of possible solutions in the sector, it depends. Minimum wages should be paid at minimum, because sometimes in the equine industry that's not happening, especially in stables. So we want to at least have that floor met, but be cognizant of broader conversations about competitive advantage for employers who are able to increase their wages a bit. That will make them a more attractive place to work, especially if it's combined with respect, if it's combined with a professional work environment, if people feel valued. And there are also, in some countries, grooms have formed associations to try to leverage collective power. There are some of those sorts of strategies. Are there any sector-based strategies or things that could be put in place? Could there be a way of recognizing particularly strong employers with a badge or a certification or something like that to try to encourage those and recognize and reward those who are setting a high standard? I think that those would all be worthwhile exploring opportunities and seeing where Ontario might be able to learn from some countries, like, for example, Northern Europe and Sweden, where I've done a lot of work, where stable staff is a career, and it is a lifelong pursuit, and you're going to have good working conditions, and you're going to have holidays. and maybe benefits and maybe some things like that. So, we could do some cross-cultural analysis, but I think that there's a lot of potential there, though it's really challenging. So it's going to take some nuance and some real commitment to try to find those opportunities. But kudos to everyone who's making it possible and want to recognize them, because some people are finding that balance and they're being rewarded with retention. I'm at a stable where the same woman works Monday to Friday and she's been there for years. So, there's just yet another example, and it is possible.
Thank you, Kendra. I'm going to put that question sidelong to Victoria. Part of the hard reality is that one of the reasons in any sector why salaries are what they are has to do with how much money employers are able to bring in. And horse people, we're so cheap, really are. Victoria, you talked about enjoying teaching and developing staff. So for an employer who may not be able to pay luxurious rates, are there professional and personal development aspects of a career path that they could offer, that you've been able to offer, that you think would be a benefit to employees and help to balance off earning a lower salary than they might in another sector?
Yeah, so we definitely like to do a bit of a probation period. It's normally 30 days where that's kind of your time for all of your training, where it's going to continue after the 30 days. But in those 30 days, it's a very specific set of hours that we're going to work on certain things, whether that be as basic as learning to lead a horse, depending on their experience. And I was going to mention the benefits as well, that some people, that's definitely something I'm striving to work into because, yeah, it is hard to pay much more than minimum wage for a lot of these facilities. So benefits and things like that, where we're working with high risk animals, right? Like there are definitely the possibilities to get hurt. So things like that would probably be pretty beneficial. I know they were to me. So that's definitely something that I think would be good to strive towards.
Thank you. We have two questions for Kendra that have come in through the chat. I'm going to combine them. The question is, given how much work you've said workers need to know about horses in general and individual horses to be good staff members, what do you think would be an appropriate salary level based on what skilled labor is paid across our country? And in addition to that, a second person asks, how can we find a good metric to determine if the salaries that we are offering as employers are appropriate or not, either compared to other equine facilities or compared to analogous industries or industries that require analogous levels of skill and effort?
The latter is a really interesting question. And this gets down to some really key questions about what we call pay equity, which is equal pay for work of equal value. And there are labor economic experts who could undertake that kind of research. If Ontario Equestrian or Equestrian Canada or Guelph or someone wanted to solicit that kind of an analysis to see what sort of male-dominated occupation is it equivalent to and how much is paid there. Now, I think the findings would be kind of staggering, to put it mildly, because I think we'd end up with a comparator like a general laborer on a construction site who's going to be well into the $20 per hour. And I don't know that there are too many stables that are going to be able to afford that. So I think a better answer to this question is that there's no one size fits all. There are a few tools that employers can use. So for example, there are a number of living wage calculators that exist, and they take into consideration geographic differences. So what Victoria versus Lisa, for example, are going to have in their communities are going to be quite different in terms of those standards. And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Those sorts of things already exist. I think if you can post on your ad that you pay a living wage, that is going to be quite appealing to a number of people. At the same time, we tend to think in terms of hours a lot, I think. And maybe it's time to disrupt that paradigm a little bit and start to talk about salaries. There are people who are on salaries within the equine industries. That was very clear in their report. And that goes away to professionalizing the work a little bit. Even if you're calculating what the salary might be, you are using an approximation of how many hours are going to be worked. But providing people with salaries allows for possibilities like the equivalent of a paid sick day, which is that if you are genuinely sick and you need to stay home and we don't want you getting sicker or getting other people around you sick, then you're able to do that without losing pay. That could be incorporated in terms of trying to determine a salary. I can't give a tidy answer, unfortunately, but I think that using the tools like the living wage, thinking about things like salaries, allowing that some weeks will be less and some weeks will be more, whereas people understand the pay will be consistent, that could be considered quite an attractive feature. So employers could do the calculations needed on their end. I mean, I think if you're getting up around $20 an hour for stable work, if you can manage that, you're going to have a competitive advantage, and that it might be worth providing that kind of investment in your workplace, but it's going to vary a little bit depending on the geography.
So, Julia, as someone who is an employer who runs Willow Ridge Equestrian Center, when you're hiring staff, how do you, from a practical perspective, determine the wage? Is it based on what similar facilities are offering in your community? Is there some other metric that you have, bearing in mind that there's always the hard stop based on what you can afford? But when you're trying to decide how much is this position really worth, how do you go about that?
I'd say realistically, we are trying to really just do most working off board as our primary search for employment at this point in time, just to make it a little bit easier, that it's a bit of a trade-off. We're not necessarily having to pay a significant amount of money, but it's someone that's invested in the barn and in their horse, and then they're working off costs associated with that. It's definitely tough in my area personally, because we have a lot of little self-care outdoor board type facilities, and we are on the higher end of things, charging for a full care board with all the amenities that most barns around here do not have. So, I mean, we're definitely not advertising board as a cheap option for people, which is tougher to draw in clients themselves. As a result, we'd be able to pay staff an appropriate wage that's definitely more than they would be getting at other barns. I think our biggest challenge is more that we don't need someone full-time around here, and it's tough to employ someone part-time to do 3 to 4 hours worth of barn work and not be able to provide them with a full schedule either. So there's definitely a lot of obstacles that come with that, and that's why it works best for us at this time to try to do like working off board as the employment situation, instead of trying to employ someone full-time and keep them when we only have 3 to 4 hours of work for someone per day.
Thank you. The next question we have from the chat goes to Lisa. Lisa, what are the specific qualities you look for in employees for equine assisted therapy? You did speak about wanting to see your staff be adaptable and being willing and able to deal with the unexpected. Are there additional skills, be they technical skills or personal qualities, that you look for that are, if not unique to equine therapy, at least specific to equine therapy?
I need someone who really takes the time to notice the little things with our clients, because the little things for our clients can be the big things. So someone who's very perceptive of everything going on, someone who's very mindful of people's emotions and how to be a good person in their week or in their day and benefit them in every way we can. So I really look for anyone who is able to show me that they want to understand what the purpose of equine therapy and equine assisted learning is, and that they, once they learn that they understand the reasons behind it and why we do everything, and that they're always mindful of those reasons. So I guess attention to detail, but not necessarily the same detail as someone would have for their stable management, who, for example, my summer student would do stuff like that. She needed to pay attention to feed and the horse's well-being and how they look every day, stuff like that. That's attention to detail in that sense. I need anyone on my equine therapy team to be very attentive to the details of our clients. So yeah, that's pretty important quality I look for.
Thank you. We have a final question, and I will put this one to Alana. Question is this: growing up, working at horse barns and as a showgroom, the idea of paying your dues was always brought up when discussing pay, hours, or position. How do we work around this mentality of paying your dues in the industry? And I suppose what the person is asking is not that, people shouldn't expect to have to work their way up as they develop their skills. But how do we avoid a culture where people are being told there's time in your life when you should be willing to be exploited, because that's just the way it is? That's really a tough question. I'm sorry, Alana.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. But at the end of the day, if you're working, you need to be paid. There shouldn't be any mentality that you're doing this just to pay your dues. I get like if you're less experienced, but then you should be coached a little bit more. And I don't know if this is doable for a lot of people, but trainers and stuff like that need to be like, and there's so many programs out there for like working students and stuff like that, but they're able to pay their employees. You have to treat people properly. You can't. And that's where people get such a bad reputation in this industry. Like I like to say I pay my staff very well, and then they also get a stall on top of it so they'd be able to keep their horse at the place. And then most of my part-time employees are working off their board, but I'm in a different demographic area from Julia, I think is more down south. I'm kind of in a horse crowded area here, so I'm able to charge a little bit more for board, but I still like to try to keep it on the more affordable end for people. I don't really think that should continue on in our industry. People can't live like that. People can't live without being paid.
So paying your dues should include the responsibility for employers to pay their staff.
Yes.
Thank you. We've now come to the end of our evening, and I'd really like to thank our panelists, Lisa, Alana, Victoria, Julia, and Kendra, who spoke at the top of this evening, for being part of this discussion. You've all been very engaging and very candid. So on behalf of the audience, thank you for sharing your experiences with us, and thank you for reinvesting your experiences in the next generation of equine employees and employers.
As Akaash said, thank you all so much for the great questions, but unfortunately that is all the time we have for tonight. And once again, I'd like to give a special thank you to Dr. Coulter, Akaash Maharaj, and all our panelists, Victoria Willen, Julia Howe, Lisa Vicare, and Elena Burden, for being here with us and allowing us to engage in such astute conversation. Also, another thank you to our sponsors, Acera Insurance, Equine Guelph, SmartCert, The Rider, Schleza Saddlery, Canadian Horse Journals, and KX Radio for helping us make tonight happen. Also, a massive thank you to Hillary Greger. Though she is not seen here, she helps run all the behind-the-scenes details, and we truly would not have been able to make the symposium happen without her. Before you go, we encourage you to complete our brief feedback survey, which is on screen and will also appear as a link in the chat. This will allow you to win a chance to a saddle fitting gift certificate, thanks to Schleza Saddlery, and a gift certificate toward a SmartCert massage course. A reminder that a recording of each night of the Equine Industry Symposium will be available on the BBRM Equine Management YouTube channel. Finally, thank you to you all for joining us at the first night of our 8th annual Equine Symposium. Be sure to tune back in tomorrow at 7 p.m. for the second of 3 nights of the symposium. We will be joined by Joel Lalonde and Sean Jones, who will be discussing successful business models and succession planning. We hope to see you all there. Have a wonderful night.